The Bee. By Charlesbridge Publishing. Among the flowers. In springtime, nature wakes from a winter sleep. The air is sweet and fragrant as flowers bloom. The bright colors of the meadow flowers attract many buzzing insects. A honeybee flutters around her hive, making sure that she will be able to find her way back. Then she flies into the field, searching for flowers. Among all these colors and scents, the honeybee chooses a flower that has a lot of nectar. Nectar is a sweet liquid made by flowers to attract bees and other pollinators. We'll see this photo again on pages 4 and 5 as seen under ultraviolet light. Oh, I see. It's these flowers under ultraviolet light, which means that's how the bee sees the flowers. Honeybees can't see the color red, but they can see these poppies using their ultraviolet vision. Like that. The honeybee returns to a flower that is rich in nectar. The pollen basket. All worker bees are female. One of their many jobs is to gather food from flowers. Thanks to their long tongue, honeybees can soak up nectar that is inside a flower. They store nectar in a sac called a honey stomach. They must visit about 100 flowers to fill their honey stomach. Honeybees also gather pollen. A honeybee uses her jaws to grasp the stamens of the flower, then shakes the stamens, covering herself in pollen. A stamen is the male part of the flower, and it makes pollen. Spiders prey on honeybees, attacking when one lands on a flower. After leaving a flower, a honeybee cleans herself with the brushes on her hind feet. She moves the pollen into pollen baskets, which are hollows on her rear legs. Once her pollen baskets are full or her honey stomach is filled with nectar, the honeybee goes back to her hive. A honeybee lands on a flower and soaks up nectar with her long, hairy tongue. This honeybee's pollen basket is full of orange pollen from a dandelion. Yeah, wow, it's orange. The bees dance. Once a honeybee nears the hive, guard bees greet her. These are worker bees that protect the hive and make sure that the honeybee belongs to their colony. The way is finally clear and the honeybee enters. Inside the dark hive, thousands of honeybees make buzzing sounds with their wings. The honeybee gatherer touches one of them and offers a bit of nectar that she has regurgitated, that means spit up, from her honey stomach. After many nectar exchanges, the honeybee begins to dance. This dance shows the other bees the way to the flowers she has found. Honeybees return to their hive before the sun sets. A man-made hive contains thousands of bees. Each bee that wants to enter the hive must first get past the worker bees that are on guard duty. These honeybees are exchanging nectar. The bees form a circle around the gatherer. They touch her with their antennae to feel which way she moves. The gatherer wags her abdomen while moving a few steps in a straight line to show the direction of the flowers. The faster she wags, the closer the flowers are to the hive. Once the other honeybees get this message, they fly away to collect more pollen and nectar. The colony circles the honeybee as she dances. There she is in the middle. Making honey. The worker bees that have stayed behind in the hive exchange nectar mouth to mouth. Each honeybee transforms a little of the nectar from her honey stomach into a food called honey. The inside of the hive has thousands of small wax cells that make up the honeycomb. Each worker bee will deposit some honey into one of these cells. Pollen, an important source of protein for honeybees, is stored in separate wax cells to be used later for food. The long tongue helps honeybees to suck in the nectar that is hidden at the base of flowers, as well as to deposit honey on the cells of the honeycomb. Each flower's pollen has its own color. This cross-section of the honeycomb shows that the honeybees have visited 3 different kinds of flowers. You see right there, it's a little bit orange. We've got yellow, orange, yellow, and then sort of brownish purple, and more yellow. A worker bee fans her wings for hours on end in order to thicken the honey. When they return to the hive, gatherers upload their pollen balls into the honeycomb to share with the others. The rest of the worker bees pile up the pollen balls in the cells. The honey is still too thin to be stored. The excess water needs to evaporate. Sitting above the honeycomb, worker bees fan their wings to create a current of air. It's hard work, but efficient. Soon the hive cools off and the honey thickens. Fanning changes the temperature of the hive by 1/4 degree. A honeybee can measure the temperature with the tips of her antennae. So there's her antenna, and she's dipping them in the liquid to see how warm it is, measuring the temperature. Wax, a building material. Thanks to the honeybee's fanning, the honey is thick enough for the cells to be closed up with wax. When worker bees are 12 days old, their body is ready to produce wax. They secrete wax through glands in their abdomen. Then they take the wax and use their mouth to shape it into the honeycomb. A job for each bee. Worker bees are infertile females. Each worker bee's job is determined by her age and the needs of the hive. A worker bee is first a nurse, then a wax worker, then a guard bee, and finally a gatherer. The only fertile female in the hive is the queen. Her job is to mate with drones and then to lay eggs for the nest for the rest of her life. Drones are male bees, and their only job is to mate with the queen. The wax workers in the hive must eat 10 pounds of honey in order to make 1 pound of wax. They work in groups to construct the honeycomb. This honeybee uses her jaws to spread out each bit of wax. Unused pollen turns moldy in the open cells of the honeycomb. The brood nest. Having mated with the drones, the queen bee's job is to lay eggs to ensure the survival of the colony. In the hive, the queen stays in the middle of a small circle of worker bees. From time to time, she gets food from one of her young worker bees, while the others lick her. By doing this, the workers swallow chemicals that are then passed mouth to mouth as the honeybees exchange food. These chemicals prevent the worker bee from becoming fertile. At the center of this photo, the queen can be seen laying eggs. The worker bees pile up food supplies around the edges of the brood nest. That's the queen in the middle. She's a lot bigger than the other ones. Worker bees tend to the brood nest. The tireless egg-laying queen bee is surrounded by worker bees that feed her after about every 20 eggs she lays. She's huge. And if we go in close, you can see all the little bees in the comb. There's a lot of them. That's the brood nest. The queen bee checks each wax cell to make sure it is empty before she lays an egg in it. Then she continues her tour of the other cells. These cells make up the brood nest. A queen can lay up to 3,000 eggs in one day. These eggs will produce worker bees. Keeping up the population of worker bees is important to the survival of the colony. Fortunately, laying eggs is the queen's only task. The younger worker bees are responsible for raising this large family. When they are laid, the eggs are deposited deep down in the bottom of each cell. So see that tiny little whitish pinkish thing? That's the egg. Each cell has its own egg. Larva food. The worker bees keep the temperature inside the brood nest at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. After 3 days, a small worm-shaped larva emerges from each egg. The nurse bees are ready to give the larva their first meal of royal jelly. Royal jelly is a secretion made by young worker bees. On the 4th day, larvae are fed bee bread, a mixture of water, pollen, and honey. After the larvae have been on this diet for 4 days, each cell is sealed up with a wax cap. Each larva will go through a metamorphosis, or change, first into a nymph and then into an adult. Nurse bees are never idle. They have little time to feed each larva the necessary 6,000 times.